Ms Lauder.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker. I move the motion standing in my name on the notice paper relating to governance in the ACT.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Ms Lauder.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker. Today I wanted to talk about the inconsistencies, the one-off approaches, the ad hoc approaches, double standards and preferential treatment this government has demonstrated. My colleagues and I, over time, have raised many issues in this Assembly that expose a government that's become so used to governing it takes the people of Canberra for granted. I'll talk about some specific issues, Madam Assistant Speaker. Some of them include the recent lease variation charge enormous increase that came through in the budget. I've had this talked about to me as a huge misfire on the behalf of the government, which will potentially see a fall in LVC revenue as it takes projects from feasible to not feasible to complete. More concerning is that I've been given advice that there's been a rush in applications. Some consultants are advising clients to quickly lodge development applications before the charge becomes effective, as there are some transitional arrangements in place. This increase in the lease variation charge will see the monopolistic position of the government's land agency further reinforced at the expense of small builders and small townhouse projects. The government often says, in many different forums, that it's committed to providing affordable housing. However, this big new tax of LVC hits first home buyers hard because increasing the cost of development will increase the cost of properties and it will reduce the availability of affordable housing. This may become a deterrent for suburban renewal as costs to developers become unsustainable. If there are no buyers, there's no development, and it will kill competition within the land supply market because, Madam Acting Speaker, it doesn't apply to the government's own land supplier or to Mr Fluffy Sales, which will of course now get a big head start over any competition. This change only affects residential purpose leases, so it misses all greenfield land, in other words, the LDA or SLA land, and commercial areas where large apartment developments can be built. The simple reality, Madam Acting Speaker, is this LVC in the budget is effectively a tax which targets the only real competition to land supply that the government has, its own ratepayers. Other examples that we've seen, Madam Acting Speaker, is the debacle that is the contentious use of community facility zone land. We all understand in a general sense that the purpose of zoning laws is to improve and protect the public health, safety, convenience and welfare of our citizens. It's to help plan for the future development of communities. It's to develop new community centres with adequate utility, health, educational and recreation facilities, to recognise the need of industry and business for future growth, to provide residential areas with healthy surroundings for family life, and ensure that the growth of the community is constant with the efficient and economical use of public funds. Yet we've seen, Madam Acting Speaker, the government sneak through a technical amendment that significantly changes their ability to use community facility zone land, which takes away from the amenity of all ACT residents to expect community facilities where they live. There has been, in some areas, community outrage at the proposal to build public housing flats or townhouses in 5 suburbs. But as I've said in another discussion, Madam Acting Speaker, I think that argument that community outrage will have taken place if there'd been a proposal, for example, to build a defence facility on that community facility zone land. The actual purpose for the building on that land wasn't the point. The point was that it wasn't being used for a community facility. However, the government chose not to be transparent and they kept the information about changing these purpose for the community facility zone land from the community. And instead of listening to those who are concerned about the developments, the ratepayers who indirectly fund these developments, the government has dismissed them. They've labelled the concerns as NIMBYism. This is one of those arguments that's really difficult to rebut, because what you're trying to do is show that people don't have regard for people in public housing. So the government is using this argument to belittle the concerns of local residents. But local residents, some of whom purchased properties near the CFZ land, expecting the zoning to be for community facilities, are quite outraged at being labelled NIMBYs. They purchased these properties in the expectation that there would be a future facility there for the benefit of the entire community. However, that's not what's happened, and it's demonstrating the contempt for the people of Canberra that the government has been showing time and time again. I'll run through another couple of quick examples, Madam Acting Speaker. The Brumbies, for example, the government agreed to waive the $7.5 million lease variation tax for that the Brumbies land would have received. Questions have been raised about whether the tax benefit went to the developer rather than the Brumbies, and many, many questions remain unanswered. Another example, Madam Acting Speaker, is the CFMEU site in Dixon. Yeah, that one. The one that was purchased, a block of land owned by the Tradies Club, which also happens to house the CFMEU headquarters at Dixon, for $3.9 million in 2014. That's right, nearly $4 million. Pretty much $4 million for a block of land. How much would you expect to pay in rent for a block of land valued at $4 million? Apparently $1 per year, Madam Acting Speaker. Furthermore, the land had been valued at $3.2 million. So were there any other valuations to justify the $3.9 million? It's one of those questions in the documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. We also found that not only is the land being rented or leased back to the CFMEU for $1 a year, that $1 a year is only payable on demand. So we may not even have received the $1, Madam Acting Speaker. It makes you wonder what they're going to do with that land that they've been prepared to pay $4 million for, and the government haven't been able to articulate a plan for that land. $4 million of taxpayers' money, and the Minister and the Directorate officials were at a loss to explain what they were going to do with the site and had to take the question on notice. As another example, Madam Acting Speaker, the sale of land adjacent to Glebe Park in Braddon, there were two valuations obtained, one for $1 million, the second for $3.8 million. But then the government paid much more than, paid $4.2 million for the land that, again, the taxpayers put the bill for. The Auditor General's report was scathing in her investigation of this deal, saying that transparency, accountability and rigour have been lacking on the sale. The Auditor General was similarly critical of the LDA's purchase of land around Lake Burley Griffin, the land previously occupied by the bike hire, boat hire places, the local businesses that had been operating in Canberra for a long time. The valuations were quite different to what was paid. The Auditor General once again blasted the deal, saying the Collier's report does not stand on its own and cannot be relied upon without further review, and the final ascribed value lacks evidence and methodology. So a few examples, and there are many, many more, and some of my colleagues will speak of other examples that just don't pass the pub test. The Braddon Labor Club headquarters to be redeveloped into apartments. Another example was, which makes you question what's going on, was there is a golf club who's looking to redevelop. The government is running the consultation process, and the fact that the golf club themselves believe that by moving away from Clubs ACT to the government's preferred clubs provider would advantage them in the deal. So when there are organisations that are willing to say that publicly, it makes you wonder about what's going on with the government. How many one-offs are too many? How many times will we see these one-off deals, this lack of due process, the lack of accountability, the lack of appropriate paperwork, the lack of a methodology into how valuations or final payments, final valuations are achieved and final purchase prices. So there's one more example I'll touch on was a recent one-off deal for an inner south Mr Fluffy homeowner who was asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. On the other hand, a Mr Fluffy homeowner in Turner with similar circumstances of owning both properties on a dual occupancy block were denied the right to buy it back. When one-off deals are made, when special arrangements are made, it's hard for normal people to understand what the rules are. And Madam Acting Speaker, we have rules for a reason. We have rules and processes for a reason. And even in this place, we run to a set of rules that should be respected at all times. So it's very difficult to understand the government's reasoning behind many of these decisions. And they like to keep us, in the dark as to how these decisions are made. What we would like to see and what the people of Canberra want to see is open, fair and accountable practices from the government. Consistency is important. There is a place for special arrangements to be made, but once again, the reasoning behind those decisions must be open and transparent and accountable, not, as we've heard from the Auditor General's report, lacking in rigour and be unable to be explained. So, Madam Assistant Speaker, it's surely not too much to ask for fair, open and transparent consultation with the whole community, to ask for consistency in the interpretation and application of legislation, guidelines and principles, and I call on the government to govern with fairness, openness and transparency, and I look forward to further examples being provided by my colleagues in other areas of government, not just the planning area which I've spoken about, because this is a malaise that goes across government in the way that they apply legislation and principles and rules. Thank you.
The question is that Ms Lauder's motion be agreed